If you keep getting this warning in Vcarve or Aspire, the Vectric software that you're designing your CNC router projects with, then there are two ways this happens. So we're going to walk through them both real quick so you understand exactly what's happening and how to resolve it. So I'm going to cancel that and get out of this thing. And so what we have here are two rectangles and a line. So the first one is if you are simply just telling the software that you're trying to cut deeper than the material itself. So when you first set up your material, we're going to go back to that setup screen, which is over in File Operations. You got a little box with arrows pointing out of it, right over here on the very far left side. You click that, and in your material setup or your job size, you're going to have your thickness. This job is 0.75 inches thick. So I'm going to just OK that. Well, let's just pretend you've got your job design finished. So this is a pretty incredibly detailed design that we are working on right now. Whew, this took a lot of work. Okay, so we're going to go over to the toolpath section. So the first one is if you are simply telling the software you are to tell it the router bit to cut too deep. And that's going to happen typically on profile lines, which is that, or just in a pocketing cut. So the profile is this operation right here. To your right, it says toolpath operations. Profile is the first selection. Pocketing is the second operation. Now the third one that this is going to happen on is in V-carving. So we're going to do the profile first to walk through that. And this is going to work the same for pocket and profile. In fact, it's going to work for the majority of things. This whole concept I'm just going to show you in one. It's going to show up in virtually every different setup. All right, so we're going to click Profile. And up at the top, you have a start depth and a cut depth. So the first thing is if your start depth is 0 and your cut depth is set for deeper than the material, so if I say 0.8 and I simply calculate, it's going to give me that warning. After I select my vector, of course. So we select the vector, calculate, and it says it is going too deep. And that's why, because we simply just told it is going to go too deep. Instead of 0.75, it's going to go 0.8. Now, one of the things I want to let you know, let's just get that alarm up. You can cancel that alarm and it'll stay in the toolpath operation you're working on, or you can say OK and it'll accept it and do the calculation for you. So we're canceling that, and we're going to go up, and obviously if I change that to a 0.7, then it is going to allow me to do that. I'm just going to run through that real quick. 0.7, it's just under the depth of the material. We click calculate, and there is our toolpath, and I believe I'm using a 30-degree V-bit. So that slot is 0.7 deep. Now this must be an 1/8 inch end mill. Let's go back into this. That's a ball nose 1/8 inch. If I selected a 30-degree V-bit, let's go with, where are my V-bits? There we go. Let's exaggerate this. Let's go with a 90-degree V-bit. And I recalculate it and run the toolpath. Now, this is a 1/4 inch diameter 90-degree V-bit, so it's just going to work with that and just work its way down. If I change that bit to a much larger bit, watch this, we're going to use a 1 1/8 inch diameter end mill and recalculate that. So that's a pretty big end mill. And I run the toolpath, and it's a big, deep slot. Okay, so we've done that. We're going to go back into this toolpath. Now, the second way that this is going to happen is if your start depth is, let's just say you've got a cut on here already, and we'll just say 0.7 because that's where it's at. And then I want my cutting depth to be 1/4 inch, and I say 0.25. When you add both of those numbers together, it is going to be deeper than the material. So now we're going to 0.95. So it's going through the material, and when I calculate it, it's going to give me the alert again. And if I say OK and run it, then I've cut through the material. So we're going to reset that. We're going to close. So the two ways that you can do this in most of your toolpath deals is your start depth and your cut depth. Now, what most people get confused on is they think the start depth and the cut depth are two separate entities. No, the start depth is obviously the start depth. The cut depth is added to that. So if you have a start depth at 0.25 or a quarter of an inch already, then you put a 0.25 down here, it's going to add it to it. Now, what most people end up doing is they are going to think that the cut depth is also starting from the top surface. So if I put 0.5, now it's going to start at a 0.25 below the surface, and then it's going to cut its tool path 0.5 deep from there. And that's where most people get confused. Now, I want you to just take a note here of the text. It says start depth D and cut depth C. And if you look at the picture over here, it describes visually what that means. So I'm making this video for Chip because yeah, he sent me an email trying to figure this out. And Chip, this is probably what's happening in your project. So basically you have to start at your start depth, and then the depth you want the tool to go from there is the number you want to put in the second box. Okay, so that's the first way you can get that alarm. So we are going to cancel this. And the second one is, we're going to switch over, is the V carving. This guy, when you're doing letters or just V carves inside of shapes. So I've got this box here, and I'm going to select the box, and I'm going to go to the Vcarve function. And what we want to do is we are going to just cut it. Vcarve, the Vectric software, Spire, Vcarve, almost all softwares that do this have this feature, is going to do the calculation for the depth based on the angle of the tool. So that's why you can't change features up here. Now you can give it a start depth, but you can't give it a cut depth. Now you can actually add a flat depth. This is a part of the feature that you can stop that problem with, and I'll explain that in just a moment. Right now, let's just say we want to do a V carving inside of this box. And I'm selecting my 30-degree V-bit. Vectric is going to calculate this out in a way that over on the left, that the edge of the cut is going to be on the lines. So it's not going to worry about the depth of the tool. Its primary function is to go on cut until it gets to the depth of the lines. And naturally, it has to use the full angle of the tool, or of the router bit. So if the angle is too steep, it's going to have to keep going down until it reaches that ability to do that. So with a 30-degree V-bit, it's going to be deeper than the material, and I click calculate, and it's going to give me that problem again. Now if I click OK and allow it to run the tool path, let's zoom in so you can see it. Ooh, that's going to run for a while. And I preview the selected tool path. It is now cut through. I have my bevel angle cut, but I had to do that in order to reach the boundaries of the boxes. So what you have to do is change the V-bit. So we're going to go to a 90-degree half-inch diameter V-bit, and we're going to calculate that, and we won't get that alarm because it doesn't have to go nearly as deep. And I reset the drawing, so I just did it. It didn't give me the alarm. I reset that, and I run that tool path again, and so there we have it. Okay, so let's show you another little interesting feature. Let's go back to the 30-degree V-bit. And as we know right now, if we do this in a V-carve, it's going to cut all the way through. And the way we stop that is by telling it to use a flat depth. So we are giving it a limit to go. So right now it's starting at the top of the material, and we're going to tell it to just go down by a 0.375. And what it's going to do is going to stop at that point, and then the rest of it is going to cut flat. So we are going to calculate, and it didn't give me the alarm. I'm going to reset and run that toolpath again, and now you can see I've got angles and some interesting little radius features in there. So the reason it's got this other stuff in there is because of the step over on the tool. It's working with a point, so it doesn't look very good. Now the way you can fix this, here's a little side tip for you. The way that I can fix this is going back in, and down here it says use clearance tools. I can click that, select a clearance tool, so we'll select an 1/8 inch end mill. And what it's going to do is going to calculate the 1/8 inch end mill with that tool path, and I'm going to calculate that, and now we're going to run that. And now we're cleaned up at the bottom. We got a little bit of a radius, it looks like, in there. I'm not sure why it put that in there. Or that just may be the software doing its stuff. So anyway, now you know why you're getting the alarms. It's this rehash. The most common place where people get confused, because I did in the beginning too, is on the cutting depths. The start depth and the flat, I'm sorry, let me get out of this one. That's the wrong one. The start depth and the cut depth are added together. So the start depth is where the tool is going to start on the surface or relative to the surface, where the router bit, I always say tool, and I'm trying to break that habit. The start depth is where the router bit starts at relative to the surface and relative to where you told it from the surface. And the cut depth is added to that. The cut depth is not taking it from the same plane as the start depth. So those are added together. And the second one is in your V groove, if you're using too sharp of an angle. The way you can stop that, if you want to use that angle, the V bit, then use the flat depth command. Okay, this is Garrett. If this is helpful, give me a thumbs up, and I hope you have a great day. I'll talk to you next time.